Okay, did that. I would like to start by acknowledging that we're here on unceded Kanegehanga territory. And by way of a land acknowledgement, I'd like to just name the way that colonialism has used the tool of controlling food systems and destroying food systems and withholding food, as we're seeing right now in Israel, in Palestine. So this is something to really think about, and to think about the connection between food sovereignty, food security, and land back, and how the ways that food systems have been destroyed has been through land theft, and the way that food systems can re-strengthen is through land back. So what did I say? Yes, you know what I mean. So I wanted to name that. I would like to thank our partners. So I'm Jen from Research for the Front Lines, but several organizations have supported this event, including University of Victoria's Environmental Studies Department. So thanks for folks over there. Thanks for the folks joining us from all the way in Victoria, BC today. Thank you folks at the Concordia Social Justice Center. So Christiane and those folks, thank you. Thanks to Emma and the folks at Shift Center for Social Transformation here at Concordia. Really appreciate the support. This is one of a series. We Research for the Front Lines likes to do these events about once every month or two. And the idea is to train up ourselves and our networks, the volunteers and the community research leads in the kind of methods and skills to conduct research in movements and communities that can transform systems. And to do research in good ways. So today we're learning more about Indigenous food sovereignty and community-led research and how those contribute to social transformation. So if you're interested in learning more about Research for the Front Lines, we have a website, researchforthefrontlines.ca. If you're interested, if you're part of a movement or community who's fighting for environmental climate justice, and you could use some research support, we have all kinds of forms of support from funding for your time, for your research expenses. We have a big network of research volunteers who offer their time and skills on community-led work and other forms of support. And if you're a researcher at a university who wants to donate some of your time and skills to these movements, feel free to get in touch through our website. So that's Research for the Front Lines. That's our partners. That's enough preamble. Now I'm going to introduce Jamie Vincent, who is going to moderate this panel. And then Jamie, in turn, will introduce our two panelists tonight, Shannon and Tiffany. So Jamie Vincent is Anishinaabe from Algonquins of Barrier Lake from her dad's side, and mixed English and settler Canadian descent on her mom's side. She grew up at Hull. She has a background in ecology and conservation science. Her credentials include a Bachelor of Science in Biology from University of Laval, a Master's of Science in Biology, and a graduate diploma in Indigenous Policy and Administration from Carleton University. So Jamie is also a research coordinator, Research for the Front Lines. And I got the pleasure of meeting Jamie about a year and a half ago, and we've been working together as a team with Marcy McDonald at Research for the Front Lines. And so it's an honor to work with you, Jamie. Thanks for taking on this moderation role, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jen, and welcome everybody who's tuning into this conversation. Thank you for being here. And thank you, Jen, for situating this conversation. As we enter into it, it's a discussion about food sovereignty, specifically Indigenous food sovereignty. So it would really be remiss of us not to acknowledge the ongoing violence and genocides occurring through the world right now, and how important it is to have these discussions and consider the profound impact of community-based work and its powerful force for change against oppressive systems. So thanks again, everyone, for being here. Before I introduce our panelists, I'll just mention that I personally won't be actively monitoring the chat during the discussion, but we will be taking a Q&A period towards the end as time permits. And at that time, we'll prioritize questions from Black, Indigenous youth. And we'll alternate between virtual audience and in-person audience. So keep your questions in mind towards the end. So the goal of today's discussion is to have a talk about the concepts of food sovereignty and community-led research and exploring the links between the two. And both these panelists are wonderful. I can't wait to introduce them and to hear their thoughts. So we have now just a little over an hour for our discussion, and that'll leave us enough time to take questions at the end. I have about 8 questions, give or take, for the panelists. And before we get into those questions, I'd like to maybe ask you to introduce yourself briefly to the audience and describe in a few words what community-led research and food sovereignty work you're currently involved in. So maybe we can start with Tiffany. Tiffany, you know that you're a Secwepemc land and seed steward, language learner, Indigenous researcher, and food sovereignty advocate. And Research for the Frontlines has had the opportunity to work with you over the past year or so. So Tiffany, would you like to tell the audience about what you do?
Yeah, for sure. Wide Coquitep, Tiffany Traverse, West, Secwepemc, Slaka, ta Secwepemculu, ta Kenpesket, Esh, Makiskanuk, Mutkana Treaty 18. Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Traverse. Yeah, and like Jamie said, I'm a mixed Secwepemc and Sema, which is our word for settler, land and seed steward, and I'm living now actually quite a ways away from my home territory of Secwepemculu. I'm in the northeastern portion of what's now known as BC. So that would be kind of right around Fort St. John, Dawson Creek area. So quite a different ecosystem than I'm used to back home, but I'm getting to know the plants and animals out here as well. Yeah, and I'm really fortunate. I'm now going into my 2nd year being supported through Research for the Frontlines. It's been an amazing opportunity to be able to allow me to actually leave my provincial wildfire job and really hone in and focus in on Indigenous-led conservation, foodland conservation work, and working with native seeds. So I'm actually happy to be diving into sort of a native Secwepemc seed school that's going to be happening at home. In a few of our communities, we actually have 17 distinct communities, and I'll be working with about 8 or 9 of them for this summer. And that's going to be a fulsome curriculum built around native seed, plant identification, talking about our traditional uses, and then how to collect, clean, dry, store, and then actually propagate these culturally significant plants. So yeah, particularly looking at areas that have been impacted by wildfire, because we're seeing a lot of that impacting our communities, particularly in the interior of the so-called province. So yeah, that's where my work is taking me now. It's good to be here.
Great, thanks, Tiffany. So for our second panelist, Research for the Frontlines has also had the opportunity to work with for over a year now. Shannon Chief has her work as a project coordinator for the Anishinaabe Moose Research Committee, which is a grassroots group of Anishinaabe people fighting for the moose population and guided by elders and traditional governance models. Shannon, would you like to tell the audience a little bit about the work you do?
Just going back maybe a year and a half or so, I've worked as the coordinator for the Moose committee. Our committee consists of like a member from every each community that want to take part in like trying to find ways how we can protect the moose populations for the long term. And I find the work that we have done through like consulting our communities, what we want to do with the moose, or how do you see protecting the moose, a lot of knowledge came out of these conversations, and I find it's just awakening our ecological knowledge that we have of the land, the way that we used to monitor our own territories before, the Indian Act system came in and things like that. And I really learned a lot from the people when it comes to like managing populations, on how they went about that and how they use traditional governance to bring the people together to discuss, just the land itself. And so there's a lot of history that is also being shared by our community members. In every community that we went, we had maybe like this 10 to 15 people, but all these people had something very valuable to share. And this is what helped us build up our preliminary report.
On caméra, quoi.
Peux-tu dire là-dessus, genre une minute pour
And then sorry, I got disturbed. And then we continued off after that. Now we are looking into maybe 5-year studies on the land. That is more like studies not just on the moose, but it's also all wildlife, because everything right now that we are facing, you know, there are 3 challenges that we have identified. What affects the moose, and it's climate change, deforestation, and sports hunting. So that not only just affects the moose, but it also affects the other animals as well. So in many ways, the forestry kind of like just it hurts the population, because you take out so much trees away, you're taking away a lot of these homes. Some lives get lost along the way. Small animals can't flee just like big animals can, you know. And that also affects our ways of how we hunt on the territory. You take away a big portion of the land, the trees, then you have to go further away and further away just to go find whatever you're harvesting when it comes to the food on the territory, the kind of plants that we eat, the kind of foods that we find in trees, plants, and roots. But it's also like the animals, because some animals contain medicinal use that we need, but also ways that we can feed ourselves to sustain our families, to obtain, you know, good health, you know. So a lot of the challenges we also face is like diabetes. You know, the more that we focus our food intake coming from the stores and not focusing out on the land, you know, then that affects like everything we do. So there's so much knowledge that comes out of from the people, and I find like the way that I'm speaking, what I know really just comes up from it really comes from our people. So that's what I can share for the moment.
Thank you for sharing that. All right. Let's get into maybe the first question that I have for the both of you. Is how would you explain the concept of food sovereignty based on your understanding of food sovereignty? And has your perception of that changed over time? And if so, why? I think first person who wants to answer can answer that question. So your definition, your understanding of the concept of food sovereignty.
I can jump in on this one since I'm still in that thinking. I think like I didn't really understand very much of food sovereignty, but I understood that we were eating from the territory, you know, like blueberries, you know, looking at the seasons, what do our people do in every seasons, you know, so we had a calendar. There were times I observe our people, you know, like preparing for tradition and annual feasts, all these different things, you know, this is something that we have done for many, many, many years, like hundreds of years. It shows that it's a tradition. And growing up as a teenager, you know, you're not very into a lot of these things until later on in your life. You become someone like a knowledge keeper, going back to their roots and everything, because we want to know who we are. We want to know what we could do. We want to contribute to something and things like that. So this became something, you know, just following the clan roles of how I got into food sovereignty, learning from the elders, you know, saying hours and hours and hours, listening to people. It took a lot of patience, and the more I listen to them, the more like I'm learning myself. What is food sovereignty? It's a protected right. It's a way of life for us. You know, it's not something that should be stopped. Like there's no policy in the world or anything or rule that should tell us that we can't do these things, because this has always been something that's part of us, part of our history, and it's a really good thing.
I love that. Food sovereignty is the protected right. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Tiffany, is there anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I guess in first going down this road, like actually really focusing in on specifically my Indigenous roots in our food sovereignty. You know, originally when I first started getting involved, you know, I thought of sovereignty as being this, you know, us being as the community determining the what and how of our food system, you know, what we wanted to eat, how we wanted to eat it, when we wanted to eat it. And I think that all is still true now. But I think over the years, things have evolved. And I think even looking at languages, you know, because I'm really wanting to bring language back into our teachings on the land, because it's very, very important. It's all interconnected. And things just make a lot more sense when our language is linked to things on the land, whether that's food, animals, the seasons, what's happening. You know, Shannon mentioned the calendar. I think, you know, most communities that I've seen have had, you know, like a seasonal round that shows what is typically harvested during the different seasons. And I know a lot of those are changing with climate chaos. Basically what I've found over the years though, is even looking at that word sovereign, and, you know, English language with its limitations, the word kind of has a little bit of a negative connotation, you know, being that it's like a power over a thing, like it's a ruling over a thing, having, you know, reign being in the name. And I think maybe it's getting into semantics here, but I think it's important because we talk about language, and it really isn't us as Indigenous people having a power over you know, our foods and our food systems. So I'm always trying to look at different ways to frame what that means. And like, I guess now, like, you know, sovereignty is what everyone sees. They see food security, food sovereignty, but it's almost like a, you know, like a food systems collaboration, because it really is us part of that food system. And I think to put us up on top as a reigning thing just puts us in a weird hierarchy that we never would have had, you know, traditionally in our communities. It's been many people I've talked to, not just Secwepemc people. So yeah, that's kind of how I look at it, but I'm always like, you know, definitely looking at ways to reframe it so that it's something that makes more sense to us as Indigenous people, because this whole idea of, you know, stewardship does not equal ownership, and trying to get away from that idea that we have this ego over our ecosystem, which is tough because we've been taught over time that that's what we do have. We're the kind of the all-knowing being. So yeah, it's definitely looking at things on that land level are really changing my thoughts on kind of on what that word really truly means. But it's always evolving, I think, kind of like our climate.
Yeah, I love that. Maybe we can, like, by the end of this, we'll have a new word that fits. Like, I know using the common words like food sovereignty, some people might have a better understanding of immediately where you're getting at, but maybe like food systems, relationality, or relations is much more fitting to what we're actually talking about in this case. I love that. So how do you both see how the community-led research helps advance food sovereignty or better food system relationships? That community-led aspect and the link between advancing better relationships. How would you explain that to the audience? Or how has it happened in your case, in the most recent examples that you've seen? And are there cases sometimes where when we discuss things like food sovereignty, when it's not community-led research, when it's based on other types of research, maybe we can contrast those two ways of looking at it, community-based versus not community-based.
Yeah, I guess I can jump in. I'll be quick. Yeah, I would say that in the work that I'm doing now, that is specifically a lot more focused on my own community, because I have done work in communities that are not my own. And now that I'm actually like really diving into the work that I'm doing with my own home community, I'm finding that it's imperative, especially for somebody like me who is not physically living in my home community right now, and I have to rely on, speaking to people on the phone or by email, driving to visit them or flying down to the territory. When I'm not there physically, it's really hard to get the whole picture of what's happening. And so that's why I think like my place, like my actual physical place of where I'm doing the work is really, really important, because if I'm not there, I'm not seeing the entire picture. And I think that's what happens if food sovereignty and security work isn't being done by and for the community. I think there's just so many other outside biases that can come into this work that might not be like really have the community's needs and kind of fears and wants and challenges and successes at the heart. And so I think it is really important to, when we're doing this research, that we're actually on land, we're witnessing some of the season changes, and we're able to be there and speak to our family and our kin that are there full time. And that's why, relying on, people that might be back home working in the Guardian programs, who are out on the land monitoring the most, like they're the ones that are actually have boots on the ground. Yeah, it's been really important for me, and living so far away has been definitely a challenge, but it's one I'm wanting to work on and get home and be on the land a lot more. So yeah, I really find that if it's not community driven, it's very disconnected, like it's disjointed research. Whereas when you're actually in the community with your family, talking to the elders and the youth, and actually getting out on the land, it all starts kind of making a lot more sense. Instead of just a theoretical practice of this food sovereignty thing, right? It's so different in every community you go to.
Yeah. Shannon, is there anything you'd like to add?
Definitely. I find the journey I've been on the past year and a half, it's very meaningful, because when you look at your own people, how much like the language is not as used as much, and knowing that, we're so, you think about all the years we've been colonized. You think about all the years you've been going to school in English, and everybody's being influenced to speak English, even now today, even more because of what TV and everything like that, So we're spending more time doing all these stuff in our communities, rather than, really making things land-based. And then if we wanted to bring back more in-depth land-based teachings, and that also includes food sovereignty, because it's a whole, it takes place every day. Food sovereignty is every day when it's land-based. And so the way this is helping our food sovereignty is like when we work with our elders, when we have that time to talk with them and develop certain things, like we need to be able to construct and build up teaching models so that, the next generation can pick it up. The knowledge is going to be there. And I feel like we have like the last generation of elders that are very fluent speakers. And then compared to today, we're just like on and off, or bilingual, trilingual, and then we're not fully using the language every day like they can. And so when we do things from the language with them, we can understand a lot of really good things that is being transcribed and translated and put into writing, so that we have like preserve a lot of their knowledges, but we also construct it in a way to be able to teach it to the next generation. Because I find my generation are like, we listen to the elders. There are a lot of good people that can listen, but we're also people now that, we need something written to be able to, to keep doing the work ahead and things like that, because we're the ones that went to school a lot, we wrote and everything. So it's kind of part of the way we think today too. So while we are doing this work, like making calendars, we are making maps, we are making all these different ideas of what our land studies is going to be like. It's a lot about preserving knowledge, but also it's going to be able to teach a lot of families how to get back on the land, where to find their food, how to have it in the language and things like that. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done ahead in the next 5 years. It's a lot of listening. It's a lot of taking down notes and building something so that you know, when these elders have passed on within what, less than 5 years or so, you know, we're not going to feel sorry that we did not make the time to get the knowledge from them and be able to, you know, help help us really understand what is food sovereignty. So it's a lot about making sure that the knowledge stays alive with our people.
Yeah, you mentioned language, and Tiffany, you also mentioned language and land being part of food sovereignty. I'm going to ask you maybe a question off book, if that's all right. Could you maybe explain how language is so important, and why is it so important to understand food systems and part of food sovereignty? What's the role that language plays? I think it's can maybe be understood intuitively, but if you wouldn't mind just giving more of your thoughts on that, why is language such a vital part of food sovereignty?
I think from what I can understand when I work with our elders, let's say if I were to work with a group of elders and we speak in English, making something in English, um, the way they explain certain things is not the same as in the language. So the understanding could be different. Not every English word is the same understanding or gives the same meaning in English. So I find that's just why it's so important, because when you hear something in the language, it's more funnier, it's more meaningful, it's so simple, it's not complicated, yet so important. You know, that connection, you know, you have like you talk to your elders in the language about anything, you can feel that connection going back in history and time. So that's how I find that language is so important. It's just who we are. It's the connection is so real. That's how I can describe it.
Yeah. Tiffany, is there anything you'd like to add on the language piece?
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with Shannon. It's one of those things that's like again, like with our limitations on the English language, trying to explain how our language is important to this work is very difficult. But I agree, like it's because when our ancestors were learning about life around them, that was the language they were speaking. And so their connections between like water and the different ways that water presents itself, whether it's melting or overland running or locked in snow, like there's all these different words for what that means and what it means related to the seasons and related to our overarching calendar. And so it's so tied to land, any type of land-based learning. I think it's super important. There's also even like aspects of our language that are very, very place-based. Like even within in our Secwepemc language, we have 17 distinct communities. We also have 2 different dialects, and I mean our territory is quite large. But when you think about its relation to other communities within the Secwepemc Nation, like we're actually pretty close. And just that idea that if you were in the west or the east, you might have a little bit of a different dialect. It's very much tied to like where you grew up and where your family began, basically. So that's how I look at it. It's like a very much just like not being able to take ourselves, like as researchers and scientists, out of the work that we're doing. The language itself is another piece tied into that cycle of working on the land. It's the best way I can think of it. And, you know, Shannon mentioned as well that there's a lot of people, elders that, you know, we're seeing the last of that generation now that are leaving us, and seeing the next generation of people learning the language, which is really, it fills my heart up really, really full. But yeah, it's also at the same time sad to see that there's, yeah, a lot of the people that would have spoken some of these languages as their first language are now leaving us. So it's important now more than ever to ensure that we're passing down that knowledge.
Well said. I love it when we can make so many links easily between different subjects that sometimes can be really siloed in the research academic world. Like, no, it's language, or no, it's environment, or no, it's food. And you just got to bring them all together for it to make sense and to find solutions that make sense. So yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so I'd like to ask you now, if you wouldn't mind sharing, what made you decide to start this work? Or was there a moment where you realized like, oh, okay, this is what I'm doing now? And what makes you want to keep going? Whoever wants to share first.
Well, I'll share. I was thinking about that all day actually. It came out in one of my posts on Facebook. I would have to say, ever since I learned about the clan systems, um, I had to learn a lot about my own role. That means sitting down with my mom, learning what she learned from her mom, because I follow the matriarchal clan ways of how that's done. And I find the roles that we have demonstrated was, to carry, to be those cultural carriers, but also the teachers of culture. So my grandmother displayed a lot of that. My mother displays a lot of that too. She has like tremendous knowledge of medicines, and I'm still not even there yet to understand like all the medicine that she could teach and as well with other elders. And I'm trying like all these things, but there's just so much like you can't do. You can't do it all. So you try to stick to minimizing what are your roles and responsibilities, as your own clan. So once you start looking at those things, well, it means protecting. For me, anyways, it means protecting. It also means like messaging, taking care of the message, taking care of, like the defending culture, all these things. So it doesn't necessarily mean like, because our clans are very militant, they would say, they would call it, like we'd be first and, like to arrive on scene if something were to happen and the people needed defense, that kind of stuff. Sure, we can do all those things, but it doesn't always have to be like that for all our clans. We can protect in ways like what we're doing now. We're building models. We are advocating based on research, like doing our own research rather than depending and believing what the government is telling us all the time, and then with our research and the knowledge of our people, you're protecting your food, you're protecting the animals, you're protecting for the next 7 generation, you're protecting all these things by building all these, by including people in the community-led researches, but also being able to write exactly how your people has shared your knowledge with you, like you're building up the message in a way that is community led, so for me it's just basically following those clan rules. That's how I want to say it.
Yeah. And you put it so nicely but simply, but the work isn't simple. Like
No.
when you
No.
say like, yeah, gather what the people are thinking and saying and put it into a message, like that's a lot of work.
It is.
Oh yeah, that's definitely the truth. Uh, yeah, I guess for me, I kind of go in phases where I'm like, yes, this is exactly where I'm meant to be, and then I'm like, oh my God, like what the hell am I doing? Because it can be really stressful. Like there's certain things that you might be doing on the land, or you're working with certain organizations, or you're working with government organizations. Like it can get pretty overwhelming a lot of times. And what I do is I just like I have to force myself. I have to like literally ground myself and get outside and be like, there's a reason why you're doing this stuff. Um, and it might not always be really apparent, someone's not sitting you down and giving you a book like, here, that these are your instructions. This is what you need to do. Um, and that's why things take a lot longer than people are used to. Like when you get people coming in as researchers, or even like Indigenous people starting out research for the first time, organized research that they maybe haven't done in the past. um, Things just take a lot of time, a lot more time, and a lot more intentional time when you're working in community and you're working on the land and you're working, basically you're working in service to really to the land and to what's happening with the climate and with the weather and everything that's going on. You know, I look at what I'm doing with my seed work, you know, and I'm trying to like nail down dates for when I'm going to be doing these seed collections. And I'm like, well, holy shit, things have changed so much in the last even 5 years. Like even just trying to find a window of when I might go collecting for, say, I want to try and get, you know, a dry seed and a wet seed. So like a berry as our wet seed, and then maybe some type of aster as our dry seed. And to try and find a window where they're both going to be ripening at the same time is getting harder and harder, just because everything's changing so drastically with climate chaos that's happening. And I just had a really quick story to tell just about like knowing like where you feel in place, and it's actually a little shout out to Nisconlith too. So that's one of our Lake Secwepemc nations, like our communities. They did up these really awesome plant identification cards. Super cool. They got some grant funding, and they're absolutely beautiful. They've got all these like gorgeous like full color photos, and they've even got a little QR code that if you go on there, it takes you to hear the pronunciation of the language, which is totally rad. Yeah, it's so cool. And then on the back, it's got little indicators on when to harvest, if they're threatened. It's got some stuff about, you know, ecological restoration practices that are traditional practices. These are super cool. They took a long time to develop. I think every community should have these. They're amazing, and they're such a great resource to like bring language, traditional uses, and like learning about language, like everything. It's just really, really cool. Anyways, I had to give like a super shout out to them, but I want to talk about this one. So this is Glawa. This is nodding onion. And I went back home. This is when I was starting to really do some deep intentional work back home, just having been away from my territory for so long. I went back home and I was visiting my my auntie, my uncle, and I asked them about the onions, about the nodding onion. I'm like, you know, it's the right time, you know, maybe there'll be some seeds out there. Do you mind if I go back out and just go have a look? And, you know, my uncle was like, yeah, you know, I haven't seen them in a really long time. Like they seem like they're not doing well. I think people are trying to like get down to the river and they're stomping on all of them. They're going off all the trails and stuff. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, well, if I go have a look, like, do you mind if I, you know, spread some of their seeds and like maybe move some of the bulbs off the trails just to a safer area? And he just kind of looked at me, and he looked like almost visibly like not upset, but he's like kind of getting emotional. I'm like, oh geez, like what the heck did I do, right? And he's like, that's something that my mom would do. And I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, okay, so this is like something my grandma would do. And I'm like, okay, trying to like figure out what my place is in all this work. I'm like, all right, that was like very reassuring to the path that I've been kind of in more ways than one pushed and pulled down, but to just realize that like this is the relational work that needs to be done, and there's a memory there. And it was just like a really nice moment that him and I shared, especially with, you know, parts of my family that really over the years have actually they don't want to claim their indigeneity. They don't want to get status. They don't want to they don't want to be Indian. They don't want to be Indigenous. And to have, you know, to have him be really emotional about this, and like, and actually start a conversation about what were things like when he was younger, was like a really important healing moment. And, you know, sometimes they're not quite as nice as that. Sometimes there's some pretty difficult stuff to talk about. But yeah, I was just like kind of setting my place and realizing like, okay, yes, this does feel like the right path to be going down. And again, you know, I've said it before and I'll say it again, like there's no such thing as coincidence in a lot of our worldviews. And for me, that was like a big reassurance of this path. Yeah, I just thought everyone would appreciate a nice little story. And I haven't eaten them yet in my adult life, so I'm really hoping that my 4 to 5 years of stewarding this small little onion patch, I'm going to be able to go back there and taste a few of them soon. Hoping to go back this year and try a few. There's tons of them. I went back not last summer but the summer before, and they're everywhere, so that made me really happy.
That's really, really great idea because when we were doing the harvest calendar, we were talking about like all the different kind of animals, but then they said that's not just that it doesn't stop there. Then we have to go to the traditional medicine. And then knowing what I'm hearing in the language is like, here's the medicine. You're gonna need a picture, and then you're gonna need a little description of what it is, how to prepare it, when to harvest, and all. Like, oh my god, that's a lot. And then we're just trying to wonder, like, how are we gonna be able to present this in a way so that people can really catch the meaning of everything. So your card idea is awesome. That
Yeah,
will
they're
go
wicked.
easily.
I've seen a few of them before in the past. So that one again, that's from Nisconlith Indian Band.
Mm-hmm.
If anyone wants to look them up. And I've got another one here just because where our position is, or the Shuswap Indian Band is positioned, we actually migrated to what's now known as the Columbia Valley from like an area that was through the mountains, and it actually became really good allies and ended up intermarrying with the Tunaja Nation, and they have their own as well. And it's like it's a little booklet, but it's like a
Ah,
really
okay.
yeah, really similar little thing that has like on here, it'll have a picture and then it's got habitat and things like that. I really like these ones though, because they have that QR code and you can just like literally look it up on your phone and you can hear the pronunciation of the word, which to me is super cool.
Yeah, it
It's
is.
hard
It
for
is.
me, like especially with these languages, they're not like the letters in our languages don't equal the same sounds in English. So it's tough to like it's not phonetic, right? It's not English phonetics. So that's why it's really nice hearing a language speaker speak it.
And oftentimes there you're gonna have those inboxes of people. How do you pronounce this word? And then they want you to pronounce it in a way.
It's hard to do
that-
that.
yeah, every time.
Yeah.
Yeah, those cards are absolutely amazing. Very, very cool idea. I love how you both talk about how like the kind of the challenges maybe of community-based work, like it's difficult because it's complicated and you're holding lots of relationship building at the same time you're doing that. But it seems to produce solutions that are so grounded in what needs to happen and solutions that just fit, that just answer the problems. And it might take a bit more time to get there, to get to the implementation maybe of that research, but then again, you're not wasting time on like false solutions and things that won't actually make a difference in food sovereignty. So taking the time to do things right, even if it's a more complicated process, is just, yeah, something that it just fits, right? It just fits. If you're looking for a place-based, or if you're looking to enact food sovereignty in an area, you need solutions that are from that area, you know, from that territory. So yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. Any other, feel free to ask yourselves any other questions, and you can ignore me if you want to just talk to yourselves amongst yourselves.
No, I appreciate that, Jamie. I was just gonna add, it's interesting what you're saying, like it's sometimes like you know, the work it takes more time and it's like a lot more complex and complicated. And I have to say, like it is and it isn't. Like it's kind of a funny thing when we look at it, and I have to respect, like, I see a lot of people on here I've worked with before. I see Roland, I see Brian, I see Melody. Hello, I see David. There's a lot of people here I've worked with before. So, Dana, hi, Dana. It's so funny because I think about it. I'm like, okay, who is it complicated for? And then I kind of laugh. I'm like, you know, sometimes it's complicated for maybe people that haven't grown up or shared that worldview before. But I think it's an important thing to be taking others along kind of on this ride and being able to find ways to do that that don't restrict us by like the colonial like say funding model of like, here's your fiscal year, you're ending, there goes your money, bye bye money. Like it's funny, you know, like it'd be nice to say that we don't need money to do this work, but unfortunately we're living in this capitalistic economy. We kind of need to feed ourselves too. So I look at, you know, like especially, you know, shout out to Research for the Front Lines, like now having the support that I like desperately need to be able to like, you know, pay my bills and kind of get all that stuff done without having to work a 14-hour a day wildfire job that's very stressful, very traumatic, and then come home and do my relational land work, has given me that opportunity to just like really focus and realize that it is not always necessarily as complicated as people may think it is. It's complex, like it's definitely complex, and things are like so interconnected. It reminds me of that like that meme that goes around with Charlie from It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia, and he's got like all the like lines of yarn on the wall, and he's like trying to explain all the different connections and how things are connected. And it's just like that. Like we're always just like, okay, no, this is connected to this, and like water and blah blah blah. And I think it like again, colonial time is just this thing that really messes us up. Working on this cycle that just really doesn't serve community well at all, especially with things changing so much. So yeah, I just a funny point, like just thinking about things that are either confusing or people aren't quite understanding. It just takes that time to really go deep into the complexities of our work. It was interesting actually, like funders are getting a little bit better, like, and I want to talk about successes and not just like completely shit on all over everything that's happening in academia and institutions. But like I have this like funding, and it's been awesome. Like working now with Secwepemcúl'u Restoration Stewardship Society, we had this pot of funding to do this work that I'm going to be doing now in my territory on seed stewardship, and how things went about just with like the really wild wildfire season we had last year. They were busy, they were in it, they were working on what was happening on the land. And when it came down to it, they're like, oh my gosh, we have this money that we got for the seed collection program. And through a bunch of people, they finally reached out to me. They're like, would you be willing to do this? And I'm like, yeah, cool. Except for this money's going to be gone on March 31st, and we need to do collection in the summer. So they're like, okay, we'll talk to the funder, and they went back and forth, and the funder was like, yeah, we'll give you until September. So funders are getting a little bit more flexible, like as long as you have like a good back and forth relationship. I've been finding. Obviously there's still things that, you know, we have to be showing deliverables and reports and things like that. That I don't think that's going to go away, but yeah, just to kind of give a shout out to some of the funders that are just like really trying hard to make it so that our work on the land isn't being bogged down by other people's complexities. I find that those are almost like imposed complexities on us, whereas like we're going by the seasons and what the land is telling us to do. So yeah, I just wanted to distinguish that, because I think it's kind of a funny thing that gets thrown around, is that, oh, it's too complicated, it takes too much time. Well, it's like, you know, time isn't real. Like we need that time. Like that's what it takes.
That's a great point. You mentioned funding and some funding structures being a challenge. I was wondering if there are any other challenges that you think food sovereignty in general is up against. And this is a question for both panelists. So food sovereignty, but again, like food relationships, food systems. What's the biggest challenge that you're seeing right now, or opportunities too, if you don't want to talk about the crappy systems? You can talk about the bright spots too.
I think I have to honestly state what the challenge is about trying to do this kind of work, is that there's not a whole lot of big interest, and even if there is interest, it's work. You know, the capitalism economy, what kind of work time frame that we have. Well, I have to be at work, and then I have to do this, and then there's the sports for the things that we do for the kids. So it always comes back down to working with your elders and some of those little participation that comes from, you know, like your circle of people and things like that. But there's not a lot of big involvement when we want to have, you know, like those places of knowledge sharing and things like that. So I find that's one of the biggest challenges of today, because of the colonialism expectations that we are told to work, and um, extracurricular activities, where we could have more time to talk, more time to to prioritize language building along with uh, everything that we are doing that is land-based, that's trying to prioritize that part from the financial and everything that we have as part of our daily responsibilities is challenging. Time is challenging. And because of that too, what affects it is certain beliefs, beliefs of let's say we haven't been out in the land for too long, or we haven't like haven't have those traditional circles enough, to have those kind of really deep talk like we do at camp. Um, some people they feel like it's too deep, it's too spiritual, and then they just kind of step away from that. I find those are like the challenges that we face when trying to do something out on the territory, because it feels like there's like a disconnection sometimes, and we're trying to bring those back, starting by just having fire, let's get out on the land, let's do our things. And then when we have those really deep talks, it's a little challenging because it's not comfortable to some people after years of being, colonized, to know a different way of life and understanding how things are being done in this materialized world today. So I guess it could be a lot about spiritual beliefs and just being open to things like that, because a lot of our things that we do that is land-based, language, culture, all that, it's all spiritually connected, and it's easier to do the easier things like hunting. It's easier to do all these you know going out and fixing people out in the land, what is medicines and things like that. But when we want to discuss leadership, where's this going, what are we doing, that's where I find it mostly hard, hard to get our people to open up to one another, because so much of history of distrust and the ways that we were affected by like colonialism and things like that, and the way we treat each other, the way we talk to each other too. So I find that's the hardest part that I have to say. Other than that, it's fabulous. Everything is fabulous once we're out there.
Thank you for sharing that. Sorry, Tiffany, would you like to add anything before?
Yeah, like we're talking specifically around challenges with this work.
Challenges or bright spots, if you don't want to talk about the bad
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah, I would have to agree with exactly what Shannon is saying too. Like like time always kind of seems to be that one thing that's never on our side when we're working with colonial systems. And really, like I always find that there's a pressure, and it's not necessarily like a bad thing, but there is always like a bit of that tension and pressure when it comes to timelines and how to, get your deliverables out and, reaching milestones. And there has to be that bit of give and take, I find, with that, like to really build relationships with organizations, institutions, funders, like, especially if we're wanting to build what it looks like for a cohesive team. And maybe that's a support team, which will allow, the Indigenous folks to be out on the land doing the work. And then having people that are, assisting you along the way, whether that's with, research work and doing lit reviews and things like that. Like there has to be like a bit of that back and forth. It's getting better. I've found over the years, like really kind of knowing who's in it for the long haul and really wants to do the work in a very meaningful way. And it's not just about publishing, and it's not just about getting a report done. It's like, this is like long-term, like generational work that we're trying to accomplish. And it doesn't end at, on March 31st when our funding turns into something. So yeah, I find like that can be like that really like that tension and that challenge. The other really big one for me, like just really going to specifically to the seed work that I'm doing on the land, is the sheer speed at which the climate is working against us. And I hate to say working against us, because putting a like a person idea against climate, it's against us. It's let's just say it's colonialism. Okay, colonialism's against us, and it always has been, and it kind of still is right now. So because of those things, that's caused this really horrible switch in our climate, and things are happening a lot faster than they should be happening now. When I look at the foodland work that we're doing, we're so fractured on the landscape where we are, in particular here in so-called British Columbia, just because the amount of land base that's here that is considered quote unquote crown land is astronomical. Like, there's huge amounts of our traditional territories have now been deemed crown land. It's meaning that in theory, the work that we're doing on the land, whether we want to do our traditional birding practices or we're out there doing our medicine collecting, hunting, fishing, gathering, the seed collecting that I'm going to be doing, it's really fractured on the landscape. So you've got, you might have like the reserve, then you've got crown land, then you've got private land, then you've got another reserve. Like, there's no one government or one organization that's managing that land. So you've got all this red tape, and you've got all this, you've got to deal with so many different organizations and government bodies to just get anything done. And I think that's what's really caused this disruption in our foodways. And, I hate to say it, because I don't ever want to come down on conservation efforts, but the park system in so-called Canada and in particular in BC has also caused those issues of fracturing of the landscape, albeit with good intentions to protect the biodiversity and to protect the animals, the lands, and the waters. It's still removing us from our traditional practices on the land. Like, we're not allowed to hunt there. We're not allowed to fish there. And I know there's I think there's like people that are working together with certain governments to change that. I think one in particular that I can think of is buffalo reintroduction into Banff National Park or Jasper National Park. And so they're like, we're getting there, but it's taking, again, too much colonial time. And meanwhile, in the background, the climate and everything else that's happening, the drought, the incredible wildfires that we're having here, which is disrupting plant and animal life on our territories, compounding. It's compounding and compounding. And so I think that's like my main concern and challenge with working on the land, is knowing that a large portion of our traditional territory is being mismanaged. I'm not going to say managed. It's being mismanaged by entities that we really don't have a whole lot of control over. But I'm hoping that that's going to change, and seeing our cultural burning practices being revitalized is giving me small glimmers of hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also something I learned throughout the community visits we have, because not every community has rich land. Like right now, we have like a whole park where we can practice our traditional practices and all that. But a lot of the other communities upper north of the territory don't really have a place to go, safe practice. So it seems like we're losing cultural spaces for some of our people, because it gets taken up by, like borders, private properties, all these different things. So it's like stolen cultural spaces.
How would you like, what helped you both get to where you are, and would you have advice for others who might want to work in a similar field, like who might want to do similar community-based work?
Me personally, I would say ensure you have your support systems in place. I've found over the years, this has been very challenging work. It's been really a heavy load on my body and on my mental health. And that's not to say that that's going to happen to everyone. But it is very, like, depending on how deep you're wanting to go. And I really committed myself to going very, very deep with this work. it can be very challenging at times. It can take a lot of your energy. It can take a lot of your, colonial time. It takes money. It takes effort. And it takes that ability to build community as well. So yeah, I think like my one piece of advice is just to really ensure that when you're starting this work, is to really look deep at that connection that you have with with your home territory. So I think it's really, really important. I think I started doing this work and I was, you know, back and forth between where I'm living now and my home community, but I really felt still really detached. And so I had to make a very, very conscious commitment to being like, no, I'm going to be visiting. If I'm going to be doing work with and for my community, I'm back home. Like I have to be able to get back home. And I might not be able to live there yet full time, but it's just like, yeah, really putting in that commitment to physically be there on the land. It feels weird to be doing land-based work if you're not able to be on the territory, which I mean, it sounds very privileged of me to say that, but it's true. I mean, like we got to find ways to be able to physically connect back to that work that we're doing, like in service to, right, and for. That would be my advice. Yeah, it's been a heavy time, and I guess like I don't know whose idea it was for me to be doing wildfire response work and then deciding I'm doing food sovereignty work. I think it's just because my anxiety from seeing on the land what was happening working in wildfire. I'm like, oh my gosh, like I need to do this. Like I have to like find that point of entry for myself to be able to be part of the solution instead of continuing to put my physical body on the line, literally on the fire line, for a government that has completely mismanaged our forests and our traditional territories. So it's really finding kind of that like niche of where you can help. And I actually had a session earlier today where we were talking about, in this climate chaos, like there's a place for everyone. Like everyone has their favorite thing that they're good at or really want to do or want to learn, and no one person is meant to do it all. And I think that's what when I went into it, I was just like, oh my gosh, I have to do it, I have to do it, I have to work really fast. And I was trying to do it all. And that's where burnout comes from, right? And it's just now really getting deep into building that community of, family, kin, ancestors, settlers. Like it takes that whole big community of people to do this work. And to think that we as people, one singular person, can do it all on our own is actually, that's the big ego coming in there. So I think it was just a trauma response for me originally starting out. But yeah, don't do what I did. Definitely take my advice as a cautionary tale to really just find that passion and find that thing, that really just gives you that you can like feel it like right in between your heart and your gut. And I really found that seed work was kind of my heart work.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that hard work. Shannon, do you have any advice for others who would want to get into kind of similar community-based work, and what helped you get there?
I'm trying to wonder how I got here. I think it was just like my thoughts, concerns around, like who's doing the land studies, after the moratorium was achieved on sports hunting. We're still allowed to hunt, but non-native people are not allowed to come hunt on our territories, and we're still up against that this year and so on, and we'll see how that happens. And I find that the research is being rushed right now on the Quebec side, where we are being told like just keep doing the research at your pace, because it's gonna matter more and it's gonna say a lot, and we're trying to do that. And we have anxiety on one side, and one side we're trying to do a little bit of the work, just go easy, go steady, that kind of stuff, and it just like it's always like this. okay, what are we doing? What are we up against now? What are they doing? What are they trying to plan? What, are they coming in and things like that? And we're always, we always have something on one side to like look at and be aware of and inform each other of each other. So when we started this, it was just more like an idea. I went up to one person. Is anyone doing the land studies? But no. We asked the chief, is anybody doing the land studies? But no. Like, okay, we're gonna do it from a way that I know I could like try to help. So I thought like, okay, I'll just get it started, and then that's where I met Jen, just when she was starting this off, and I swear without her, I probably wouldn't be able to put things together in the way that we did, and also you do need a team of people that understands the work, that's willing to be there and contribute in the ways they can and make time. Making time is so important. You're going to need that and be able to rely on each other. That's just how I see it when we have the committee in place, because I wouldn't be able to do that without them. There's no I in anything, like Tiffany was mentioning. We have that as our planned teachings as well, like we all gonna need to rely on each other's strength to get the work done. And that's the most important thing, so that, it's not just about you. It's not just about, the way some people would view you from just by looking at you without really knowing who you are. And you really do have to allow, how would the elder would put this? You would really have to allow like the sovereign work to take its course rather than you trying to accommodate, um, your life presently, materialistically. And there was this elder that told me about that. It's like you'll have to let your sovereign work lead you rather than your materialistic life, rather than accommodate that. Because if you accommodate your materialistic life first, then spiritual work that you're doing on the land is not gonna be balanced, that kind of thing. So that took me a little bit of time to understand that, okay, so there has to be, I have to go put my foot in and just, ride what looks like a roller coaster. And it's a great experience because it changes you a lot. And I believe like work like this is like a great cause, and anything that you do for causes changes your life, who you are, and changes how you view, your family, the land, your connection with the community and things like that. And of course, like if you want to really grow from the person you are and to who you need to be, because we're not meant to stay in one place. We all evolve in some ways, and work with the land is what I would encourage. Do what you can, work with your elders, be open to your elders, be willing to be corrected by your elders. This is so important, because I've gone through that so many times. And they always keep you on your place. They always you know, they're your biggest support after, once you learn how to do the work the way that they would like to see it done, because it's very rare. In times today, you look at the internet system and things like that, all the decisions are being made there in most places or in some places. Um, it's hard to, in our traditional governance, what I'm trying to say is that in our traditional governance, it's the people that make decisions, it's the people that make the direction and all these ways, and then the leadership acts on it. That's just the way traditional governance looks like, and that's what we're trying to go back to. So that's my understanding of how to do that. So this way we always have like an advisory of elders for our studies that we're doing. Then we have, like our committee, and then there's a community that also takes part of it. So we're very all well connected and know how to be able to build your support system so that it's always strong. Like it's gonna be hard, but what's not hard is not gonna be strong.
Mm. Yeah. So just it got me thinking about what you were both saying, just because you can't do it all doesn't mean you can't contribute in really meaningful ways. And it's the power of everyone working together that really drives this forward, but everybody has to put in a little bit and make space to contribute to the work. That was amazing. Thank you both for sharing that. We have a question in the chat from Bobby Rose O'Donnell. It's going to start off our audience Q&A portion of this evening. The question is, any advice on how to start incorporating food sovereignty practices into daily life?
Yeah, I've got a
I
quick.
would have,
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Jen.
no, you go. You spoke first.
Oh, I have seeds on the brain, and I was doing a session earlier today. I would say, yeah, honestly, researching your ancestral connection and finding some foods and seeds that you would enjoy eating and trying to grow those in your own home garden. I think that's probably one of the best ways I can find. Even like simply like people can do them on, rooftop gardens, you can do them in your apartment, just finding something that you really, really enjoy and just learning about that plant and the plant's life. And then potentially, saving your own seed as well, which again comes down to adapting with climate and with, the changing world around us, and sharing those seeds. I think that's a really big one too, is seed sharing amongst friends and communities. A lot of libraries are getting kind of little seed banks set up in them. That's always a good way to get involved in growing your own food. So just a simple thing. Yeah.
Yeah, what I was thinking a while ago was going back to one of her responses. Tiffany's responses was like the best way to incorporate, food sovereignty every day into your life is basically moving to the land. Because I understand what it's like not to be out on the land, and I crave being out there all the time. I love sitting by my fire, love listening to nature. I love getting creeped out at night by bears or whatever's out there making noises. And because every day you are out there, you have no choice to move and do something to feed yourself and start practicing, and then start looking at what is it that we do in every season. So you're going back to your roots just by being there every day. What do you do when it rains? And then you start understanding how we could predict the weather and seasons as it changes when you're out there. Just by looking at the sky, just by looking at the way things are going, then the season's about to change. What something else needs to be done. Fall is entering. Oh my God, there's a lot of things I gotta get medicines. I gotta get this. I gotta get all these roots and everything, and then prepare for the winter. And this is just how you start living into it every day. And if that's not possible, at least if you have some kind of a camp that you could go to all the time, because we're always encouraging that we build our camps on the land, because the more you occupy your territory, the more you're protecting your land and your cultures and everything as well. But it's also like building seasonal camps with either the youths or things like that. You're showing that you're using the territory, but you're also willing to have that time to actually practice, what food sovereignty is in the seasonal times of what we are expected to do, or the way of life is for every nation that we are from. So connection is important. Being out there is so important. Like, I know my personal dream is to kind of like retire and be out there on the land every day. Like that. I have my son, he goes to school to do that, but might have weekends and things like that. So I'm kind of hoping that I'm going to be able to change. And it's kind of hard sometimes you try to get something going when you're a single parent, but we know it's important. So that's what I could share with that.
Nice. I just had one more quick thing to add as well for me, like it's obviously seeds and starting your own seeds and growing. Another one as well is if you have people in your community that are like reaching out, say to have like a work party, like, harvest party, or, come out and help us plant our garden, or learning how to butcher animals, like if people have harvested a big animal and they want, you know, help to come in and butcher or cleaning fish, do it. Do it. It's like a great opportunity to help community. At the same time, you're learning a very valuable skill. So if there's ever an opportunity out there to get involved with the community and they're like reaching out and needing help, because usually there's a lot of food coming in at once that needs to be prepared and, you know, properly preserved for the winter usually. I highly recommend reaching out if they're doing like an open call or something like that to go out and give them a hand. Really, really great opportunity to get on the land and just learn a basic skill, which is I think lacking in our more modern times. Is a lot of people just don't have access to that anymore. And now that we're getting more cultural camps and communities are getting their hunting camps and stuff together and fishing camps, I think more and more of those opportunities will be open to more than just like the very specific communities. I know I've seen garden harvest party all the time, and they'll send you home with veggies and feed you food while you're there and stuff. It's pretty amazing. And usually people need some desperate help at the end of the season. They're usually long, hard seasons and people are tired. So yeah, definitely just be in service, because you're probably going to learn something pretty cool.
Thanks for those answers. Are there any questions in the in-person room? Jen, I saw a hand.
You want me to like,
You can just speak up.
okay, let me know if you can't hear me or not. I had a question for Tiffany about whether the seed keeping work you do is like mostly wild seed or cultivated or kind of like a mix of both. And it, like kind of what your challenges are for either type, because like if you're growing it yourself versus kind of harvesting it on the land.
Yeah, great question. I do both. So when I started kind of down my seed journey, I was focused specifically on cultivated varieties. I mean, everything came from Indigenous plant breeding at some time, but yeah, I'm more focused on like the modern varieties. And then as I started getting into it, obviously knowing that my Secwepemc ancestors, we ate and foraged and stewarded native seed, like our traditional native seed. So I'm getting more into that. And there's so many different requirements for native seed, like predominantly being like perennial, whereas cultivated are mostly annuals. And knowing their life cycles, like really just like getting to know these plants, like a lot of them are very, very hard to grow from seed, have very specific germination requirements, take upwards anywhere from 7 to 10 years to flower. So that plant has to survive for 7 years before it'll put out a flower and create seed. So there's so many variables for native seed that are kind of working against them right now. Obviously, fire being the big one here, because what's happening is you spray herbicide on the forest to kill all the broadleaf. You create a tinderbox in your monocrop of conifers that you've created on the landscape, which creates conflagrations, which are the really big explosion fires that happen. And what they do is they burn very, very hot, and they basically kill the soil. They kill all the mycelium in the soil. They create hydrophobic soil, that's why you have landslides and overland water flow. And they create like a really horrible tilth in the soil. So the soil is very, very compacted. So that's why I've been realizing just how important it is for my work with native seed, for my work to transition. Like I'm still growing and breeding a lot of my own plants, like on the cultivated side, but I'm putting in like most of my effort and work into conserving and protecting and stewarding native species, because they desperately need it. What am I trying to say? The need for wild and native seed is much greater than what's out there. So what we're finding now, and what's part of my programming that I want to do, is start doing in situ orchards, which means planting in place, which doesn't happen very often in reclamation work. It's usually take, and then they plant them out in a nursery and then plant them back in a place that had disturbance. Whereas what I feel needs to happen is we need to do both. We need to be planting plants in place, because if we're going to come back to that population in 5 years' time when they're flowering, there needs to actually be a population there. So yeah, it involves quite a bit more work and different work, but that is where my work is taking me now. More is into the into native seed work. I hope that answered your question. It's challenging. Both of them are quite challenging. I live in an area that is about USDA equivalent zone 2, which has about, it's like a 90-day growing season. It's quite short. So even on the annual side of species, I'm working in a very, very challenging climate and ecosystem here where I am. But that's part of the adaptation work. So I do climate adaptation with my seed breeding work as well.
It feels like I'm having a conversation with a bird clan, which is very, very rare, you know. You're so knowledgeable in the seeds, and I finally understand why you're into this work right now, because of, you know, your experiences in firefighting and what you see, what's gone and everything, and the importance of regrowth and everything, fertilization, all that kind of stuff. And just listening to you talk just kind of makes it feel like finally having like one of those real conversations where I've always wondered what's it like to have a conversation with a bird plant. So that just feels like
That's really sweet.
feels like I finally it feels like
Sure.
that.
Yeah. Oh, that gives me goosebumps. Thank you, Shannon. That's really sweet. Yeah, it's it can be really hard work, but it's fulfilling work. I think with me too, like seeing the wildfire, like having my life and my community impacted by the negative impacts of fire, and how we're all really trying to heal our relationship. We're fire keepers. Like Salish communities work very intricately with fire, and traditionally have worked very intricately with fire, but like low, cold, slow fire, like we have a very symbiotic relationship with fire, where we would burn large areas of the slough around the river to ensure that we're pushing out pests and disease and mice and things like that. And then the birds will come after everything's been rejuvenated, and then they lay their nests, and then we would ethically harvest we would harvest eggs from birds, so ducks and swans. And that was the really, really intricate relationship that we had with fire, and with the fowl that would come up onto the land and lay eggs. And now we're so traumatized by fire, because so many of our communities have had to be evacuated. People have lost their homes, people have lost their lives. Like there's just so much negativity that's been happening due to wildfire. And it's created this really sour relationship of our people with fire, when we're actually, like, fire is a very, very important part of our seasonal round. Like we work with fire several times out of the year, and we cook with fire. Most of our plants, like our underground plants, our tubers and our corms, have to be cooked with fire in a pit to be able to be bioavailable for for us to eat, or else they're high in inulin, kind of like Jerusalem artichoke. So we have to actually use fire to cook them. And so we've had this really horrible disconnect and trauma around fire, and to like be working with fire keepers now, and being a baby fire keeper myself, it's been really so healing to heal my complex trauma and PTSD around being right there in the face of really horrible fires. So yeah, and then being on the land and seeing what's rejuvenating and what's not is super important, because then you know which plants are needing that little extra oomph, which I'm sure you're probably finding with the moose as well. I guess I had a quick question. I know it's 4:30, but I would be remiss. I'd be like really mad if I didn't ask Shannon. Okay, so I know you're working with moose, and I know that the moose populations out here, we have horrible ticks on our moose, and just seeing how the populations are declining based off of predation, and the winters aren't getting cold enough where we are. I'm curious, and just like for the rest of the room too, this is just my own personal curiosity. I'm curious what your in your area, what your community is seeing as like the most predominant issues that are impacting your moose populations where you are.
The most predominant.
Yeah, like what's impacting the health of your moose? where you're-
Oh, okay. Well, I know there was one baby moose that was found last May in 2023, found dead because it died from ticks and it didn't survive. So ticks are known like to like just basically live the same cycle over and over. You know, they're gonna go on a tree, and this is what biologists kind of scare you with too, is like because when they say that they're on trees, you know, then that tries to make they try to make you think that it's okay to go log then because there's too much tick and it's not good for the moose. So they try to make it look like that, and then they jump on the moose, they're gonna feed, and then they're gonna mate, they're gonna feed again, then drop, and then go back on the tree, and then it goes repetitive cycle. That's what we learned a little bit about ticks. And we do have some ticks around and on the moose and things like that. And I think the things that are most hurting the moose population here is sports hunting. And that's the reason why our people stood up together collectively, like my community. You know, we went out and we made camps and everything. And we talked about sports hunting that it's not good for the moose because it's a lot of waste on moose. I don't know how many bodies of moose that we found on the territory, you know, headless because it's a sport hunting, right? So they take the moose's head, put it on top of their truck, drive around. They talk about, you know, like what their game, that kind of thing. So that's sport hunting. But it's also like when they go into the territory, they have like first of all they're gonna have the bow and arrows are gonna come in. So the first week or something, the bow and arrows come in, they start going after the moose, and they don't hunt like we do. There's not people that were the first bow and arrow users. You know, our men literally shoot a moose, but we will follow it until we find the body, and they could go for miles and miles and miles. So we don't waste things like that. So a lot of our elders that are retired living on the territory, we found a lot of moose that are dead on the territory with bows and arrows and things. And these hunters, non-indigenous hunters that shoot them, they just shoot and they don't follow. So they just want to go out there and shoot and things like that. So that's what we identified as sports hunting. Like it's not um, food sovereignty, where you're gonna go out and feed your families because you're only making like $600, $700, $800 a month on welfare, and you can't afford as much food with that, especially today with the food prices being as it is. And then the other thing was deforestation, because what deforestation does to animals, like what I have witnessed growing up as a teenager, and what I saw on our territory was that in the back of our hunting territory, everything was all clear cut. Of course, the first summer, the moose are gonna come because of the plants that they come in and get, but it does not sustain what they're gonna eat for the next year and so on. Same thing with the bears. They can eat maybe 1 year or 2 years of berries that are going to grow after deforestation, but they never come back unless they're looking for a certain tree that can grow beside these the farm trees that are being going to be placed in there. So with these farm trees that come in, it changes the way animals come around. The rabbits or the bears or whatever that we eat, it doesn't always come around because a lot of the food does not grow healthy around these trees and things like that, these farm trees. And then these farm trees are being put there for a reason because they're going to come back maybe 20, 30 years from now. So it's a repetitive cycle. So when that happens around the territory, it changes the way we hunt, it changes the way the animals also know. After hibernation, a lot of them that go under trees, a lot of them that go into the ground like bears and things like that, the ones that have to sleep for the winter, they wake up and the land is different, it's like a big confusion for them. It's like, what happened? Where do I get my food? Normally the bear would wake up and says, oh, this is where you should get my honey every summer. This is where I can go get my food. This is where, because he's like the most hungriest person that wakes up. And then there's all these other small animals that no, they all have their food systems out on the territory. And trees, they produce so much food and a mapping and a way of memorizing where to go here and there and travel, freely. That affects what affects the animals affects us as well. So that's another thing. And then there's climate change. So climate change is like all these crazy weather patterns. And we didn't have enough snow this year. So if we didn't have enough snow, we can't go out in the ice. We can't go chasing the moose with to do like we could in these kind of the way things are today. And so that makes it challenging. So we can only be able to maybe get a moose if somebody's driving out down, a road or something like that. And then when we look at climate change, like it gets warm, gets cold, gets warm, gets cold. The more warmth we have, the horrible it's going to be for the moose, because we need that coldness for the moose, and because this is how the ticks are not going to be able to survive on. So the warmer it is, the harder it's going to be on the moose for the ticks. That's as far as we know as for that, because there's so much more studies that we need to do on the moose and its challenges and things like that, and just getting to that being in our second phase this year. So hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. It's just, yeah, it's interesting to know that there's like the very similar things that are impacting the moose here, and we're so far away from each other. And yeah, the poor practices in mismanagement of our forests is similar. The sport hunting thing, like these are all things just like working against the poor moose, which I mean, I can't imagine the amount of food that they need to eat to survive. And when it's like completely impacting their whole food system, like you said, it's making it a lot harder for them. And then of course, in turn, harder for you and your community. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that, Shannon. Looking forward to reading more about your work.
Me too.
Thank you both so much for everything that you've shared with us today. And I hope you enjoyed this conversation as much as I did. I had a lot of fun listening to you both. Considering colonial time limits that we've put on this conversation, we're going to wrap it up here. But I do want to mention that you can donate to the AMC's, the Anishinaabe Moose Committee's crowdfunding page. The link is in the chat. And is there anywhere else that people can find you online or read about your stuff, a website, Facebook, anything you'd want to leave to point them towards?
Well, we have the Anishinaabe Moose Anishinaabe Moose Committee page, Facebook page. Pretty much all we have right now. But we'll see what we're gonna grow into the next year or two, because this work's pretty much gonna be ongoing, not just the short term, but the long term.
Yeah. And Tiffany, anywhere they can find you online or follow your work?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook under Fourth Sister Farm. And I'm going to be hoping to start like an on the land blog too once I start doing the seed school, and just like I want to talk through like kind of how I develop my curriculum and stuff. So I'm going to be doing some blog posting around that. I think it'll be really fun to just document my process and share that with whoever wants to see it. I just think it's really fun to have others, learn. You learn from my mistakes, like I said, learn from the things I've done that I probably shouldn't have done. Yeah, so I'll hopefully be sharing that soon, and it'll be linked as a link tree off of my Instagram. Yeah.
All right. Sounds
Thanks
good.
again for having us. No, this is really great. And it was so great to meet you, Shannon.
I hope I meet you someday in person.
Yeah, we will, definitely. I'd like to come out your way and see Jen, give you a big squish.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Have a nice evening.
Take
Okay.
care.
Bye.
Yeah,